comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile.
Up in the sky!
Faster than a speeding bullet.
Holy, here we go again.
Hello and welcome to These Guys Have Issues, the podcast where we discuss current topics and issues within the comic book community. I'm your host, Carter Hutchison.
And I'm your guest host, Nat Yonce.
That's right. We have a newcomer to the Grassroots Comics studio here, my buddy Nat Yonce. We went to high school, same as Mike and I. Mm-hmm. And Mike couldn't make it this week, so the topic that we have today screamed that Nat would be able to come in and talk about it. This coming Tuesday, which actually is going to be the day this podcast is released, is the 4-year anniversary of Darwyn Cooke's death. He's one of my all-time favorite artists. And you know, I didn't have a podcast 4 years ago, or else I would have done a tribute then. But here we are. This is the first chance I got to, so it seemed like a good point to kind of just, if you weren't aware of Darwyn Cooke, hopefully this podcast will make you seek out some of his work. And if you're a big fan, then hopefully this is just kind of like a gigantic love letter to one of the best comic artists of all time, in my opinion. So, Nat, what was your introduction? What was the first time you encountered Darwyn Cooke?
You know, I was actually at Legion Comics in Birmingham, and I saw either a trade or perhaps the first issue of New Frontier.
Oh, wow.
Just about everybody,
right.
Post Darwyn Cooke, it's their introduction to him. And the style just screamed at me because it was so very much like what we had grown up with Bruce Timm, only a little like softer edged.
Okay, I can see that.
I really appreciate that sort of style. I like.
That's true. Whereas
it's
Timm,
like easy reading.
Right, Bruce Timm is like a really like square jaw, where
very angular.
Right, Darwyn's is maybe a little bit more realistic, but still that retro kind of. Very, like I said, very angular faces and costumes.
Yeah, interesting that he has much starker outlines with more rounded edges.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Okay, so the way we're just going to kind of do this tribute is we're mostly going to frame it around the New Frontier, his Justice League story. That is Darwyn Cooke's opus. That's completely his baby. He, to my knowledge, it's the only thing that he actually wrote. Well, no, that's not true. I'm sure he did Batman Ego too, but he wrote and drew the same story, and it's massive. If you ever see it in a store, it takes up a lot of a lot of room on my bookshelf. I can say that. So before we just dive into it, like always, here's a quick message from our Patreon.
All of Grassroots Comics is funded through our Patreon, patreon.com/grassrootscomics. For as little as $1 a month, you can become part of the Grassroots Comics community, which includes many perks, such as having your name mentioned in this segment of every episode of the podcast, the ability to suggest topics of discussion for shows like These Guys Have Issues, access to the private Grassroots Comics subreddit, where members can continue discussions started on the podcasts or start their own, behind-the-scenes access to the GRC studio, and early access to digitally released comics and Classic Cartoon Rewind. So it is the goal of all of us here at Grassroots Comics Productions that one day the Patreon is strong enough where we are able to produce the stories, artwork, and stop-motion animation shorts pitched and selected by the Grassroots Comics community. But the only way that becomes possible is with a strong Patreon. So if you feel that the entertainment value you receive from this podcast is at least worth 25 cents, then please become a Patreon contributor today, and with our powers combined, we can have all of our stories heard. All right, now let's get on with the rest of the show.
Okay, and we're back. So just to start off with Darwyn Cooke, I think it's important to know just kind of where he came from, and to me, he is very much a child of his era. Darwyn was born in 1962 in Toronto. I didn't know that he wasn't actually American. I didn't know that he was Canadian. But his father was a construction worker who then ended up leading the construction workers union. So, Nat, before we even started recording here, you were throwing out a few words that you would use to describe, or a few phrases you would use to describe Darwyn Cooke. And one of those, like you said, is a loaded term, but was social justice warrior. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that about his father until looking into, research for this episode. But with that kind of context, it totally makes sense, like how Darwyn shaped his worldview. Mm-hmm. So his first interest in comics came, like many kids of his generation, from the Adam West Batman live action show. So, we're in the 60s. There's a lot of pop art. There's that kind of Art Deco style. Johnny Quest is going to be a big thing here. So he would have 100%. There is a little Darwyn Cooke at some point sitting in front of a television set watching a Johnny Quest episode. And I think that just really resonates in his work as well. So he first wanted to be an artist at 13 years old after reading a reprint of Spectacular Spider-Man #2, which was a John Romita issue. So again,
not even junior, senior.
Right. The OG. So that would have been, back on the first Spider-Man run of his. I love John Romita's stuff. Side note, who's your favorite Spider-Man artist? Is that?
Oh my God. I can't. Oh, geez, I can't remember the name right now, which is killing me because it's one of the first things I'm saying here, and I'm already trying to destroy my own street cred. But no, it's whoever was drawing the very first trade of Superior Spider-Man actually had such incredible depth.
Okay.
Of field, and one of the things that I really appreciate in a comic book artist is when they can draw a scene that doesn't necessarily require the words to get across what's happening. And I know that sounds cheap to say, but it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, it is a visual medium.
Sure,
so.
Of course. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there were several splashes in that series that I thought were just spectacular. And I can't, for the life of me, give credit where credit's due.
Let's see. There was a Ryan Stegman and a Huberto Ramos.
I think it was Stegman. It was whoever did at least issue 1.
Okay.
I think that was...
That's Stegman. Yeah, that's Stegman. Okay. I'm a big Mark Bagley fan myself. That's Ultimate Spider-Man was my introduction to collecting monthly comics in general. So,
how do you feel about Bendis? I know that's not an artist, but
right, Bendis is
my favorite lately, Superman. So
yeah,
I have not read a whole lot of them.
It's not that great. Bendis, when he's good, is really, really good, and then Bendis, when he's bad, is really, really bad.
What you're telling me is it doesn't live up to the amazing covers, because those covers are why I'm buying those issues.
No, that's true, but Gleason is drawing that book, and Patrick Gleason is one of the best artists working in comics right now.
Right.
I'll agree that the issues got a lot better once Gleason got on the book, but to me, Bendis is better for street level heroes than these big cosmic-y. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have you checked out any of the 100-page giants that DC's been putting in Walmarts?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't seen any of those.
So, probably not too many Walmarts out where you are, huh?
Oh, no, there's a few.
Oh, really?
Okay. Just not anywhere near where I am. And most of them are actually just supermarkets at this point. I mean, I'm sorry, grocery stores.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. What's interesting about those books is that, in regular comics right now, Tom King is writing Batman and Bendis is on Superman. Mm-hmm. Well, for the 100-page giants, they swapped. So King is on Superman and Bendis is on Batman. And what's weird is that I like everything else Tom King has done except his Batman run. Really, I'm not I'm not too big on it. Yeah,
I haven't read it yet, but I am right there with you. Tom King has been an ironic breath of fresh air because of how stagnant his writing and art are, and yet 100%. They're amazing.
Yes,
it's stilted. It is punctuated,
Right.
There is no flow to it except that it all works and runs together and is beautiful in every way.
Sure. And his he loves to repeat dialogue, to harp on that dialogue. And it works for some comics. I haven't really been enjoying it in Batman, to be honest with you. And there's the whole Catwoman wedding fiasco thing.
Right.
It's not entirely his fault. DC kind of fucked him over with how they released the ending to that before the comic even came out. But anywho's, he fits Superman a lot better to me, and Bendis fits Batman a lot better. So I wish they would just keep that.
Yeah, right. I could see that.
Yeah. Now what I'm waiting for is when they inevitably collect those together to put into a trade, because the Giants are 4 different stories, 1 original and 3 reprints that are huge storylines in either one of the characters' histories. Mm-hmm. So eventually they've got to collect the original stories into one trade, and that's what I'm waiting for to buy.
Absolutely.
But we're not talking about them tonight. We're talking about the legend.
We digress.
There we go. Yeah, we're reeling it back into on my own side note there for Darwyn Cooke. Okay. So the following week after Cooke, had the Spectacular Spider-Man issue number 2, drawn by John Romita, he purchased a Detective Comics number 439, which featured the story Night of the Stalker. And he had decided pretty much at that point this is what he wanted to do. He also, as a young boy, would trace over Will Eisner's strips for The Spirit. Which The Spirit is one of my all-time favorite characters. And, obviously the Oscars of comics are named after Will Eisner. So heavy shoes to fill there. But so Cooke then attended George Brown College, and he was expelled after 1 year, which I think if you know anything about Darwyn Cooke's personality, he can... It seemed, I unfortunately never got to meet him personally, but he seemed like a person that could be very abrasive and very hard to work with. But that's because of how much he cared about what he was doing, really. Sure. Yeah. And I've seen pictures of him with a Scotch glass and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and stuff like that. So the idea, right? Yeah, the idea of him getting kicked out of college after 1 year is not a crazy notion, right?
Right, not too far-fetched.
No. So he first published his first published comic book work as a professional artist was in DC Comics New Talent Showcase number 19, which, as fate would have it, was edited by the Night of the Stalker artist. One of the first comics that he fell in love with was edited by in his artistic debut. However, at this time, Darwyn Cooke was only making $35 per page and did not see this as a viable career, a viable income. So he worked in Canada as a magazine art director, graphic, and product designer for the next 15 years, and he also established his own design studio. So Cooke wouldn't officially become really the comic artist that we know of until he was
late 30s, right?
Yeah, I want to say 37, but I'm just trying to make sure I get the right number here. Yeah, 37. So just really kind of goes to show you that if it doesn't at first work out for you, if you just keep plugging away at it, eventually you'll get there. I'm sure there were times where he hated it and I'm sure there were not easy times, and you can tell by looking at Darwyn Cooke's face that he has had the highs and lows of his life. You
can. In the picture on Wikipedia, you can.
Yeah, he has a lot of lines in his face, which, I've always said when I get older, I want to have a lot of lines in my face because hopefully that means you're smiling a lot, right? If you have
I like that.
Lines on the side. And yeah, he wears whatever pain he's carried with him in his life right there on his face. So he wouldn't really come back into this geeky comic book world until the late 90s when so this is a almost hard to believe story that Bruce Timm was working on the new Batman adventures. or the new Batman and Robin adventures in the Superman animated series. And it was like an ad in a newspaper or something, which I just can't for the life of me imagine seeing an ad to work on one of those shows in a new, like, what a different world just right. 20 something years ago was. But anywho's, he responded to an ad to be a storyboard artist for Bruce Timm. So he was a storyboard artist for 4 episodes of the new Batman adventures, as well as a handful of Superman ones. But what he really is known for, as far as his work in early animation before he fully got back into comics, is designing the opening sequence for Batman Beyond.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
All of that is Darwyn Cooke.
Totally see it.
Exactly, right? And now you won't be able to unsee it either.
Right,
next time watching that intro is just gonna it's gonna hit you over the head like Looney Tunes that it's Darwyn Cooke, which is, you could almost say that intro is like responsible for the success of the show, because it's just so fucking metal, and there's these cool like Blade Runner images and like that giant eye that's coming at you and that person's hand, and I haven't seen it in years, and I can still the images are right there. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so after this kind of notoriety of working with Bruce Timm, he had a little bit more pull in the comics world. So he pitched a book that would eventually end up being Batman Ego. Are you aware of this story? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So Batman Ego is a story that he, and again, 37 years old, right? It's a story where Cooke described it as, what if Batman and Bruce Wayne were able to sit down and talk about what it is they do? Now, have you actually read Batman Ego? I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
No, I haven't read Batman Ego, but I know what it is. Obviously, it's really famous. But when I was revisiting it, or I guess when I stumbled upon it again when revisiting Darwyn Cooke over the weekend, honestly, and I was reading about it, to refresh my memory, what I thought about immediately was it's such a good idea that obviously if he hadn't thought of it, someone else would.
Yes.
But knowing what I know about him and Grant Morrison, I can safely say it would come down between either of those two.
True.
Like a race to that first,
True. And I mean, you could almost argue that Arkham Asylum isn't Bruce talking to Batman. That is a very, meta kind of heady idea that, you're right, does seem like up Grant Morrison's alley for sure. But Darwyn Cooke got there first, and thank God he did, because I don't think that story would be different without Cooke's artwork in it. We can sit here and talk about all day about how great of an artist Darwyn Cooke was, but I also think that he's a underrated writer as well. All of his projects he didn't get to write and draw on. I'm actually staring at a copy right now of his Batman and the Spirit crossover that he did with Jeff Loeb, which, is a massive name in comics anyway, so it's not like
absolutely.
So that was 2000 was when Batman Ego came out. In 2001, Darwyn Cooke was paired with writer Ed Brubaker, another, giant name in comics. Exactly. And they revamped Catwoman, which this design of Catwoman is probably the one that, if you just, to me, it's the classic design of Catwoman. It's what should be in the movies. It's the first place my mind goes to, with the, the goggles on top of the cat ear mask, and the suit that zips up in the front and has the circular hook, I guess, on top of the zipper.
Oh, the ring. Yeah.
Right. There you go.
Yeah,
that's the word. The ring. Yeah. So he worked on a 4-issue series called Trial of the Catwoman in Detective Comics number 759 through 762. And in these issues, he brought back Sam Bradley, which, if you aren't aware, Sam Bradley is a pulp detective character from DC that first appeared in Detective Comics number 1. So he predates, Batman, Superman. Really, he predates superheroes in general. So it's Sam Bradley is investigating the death of Selena Kyle. So just a great idea, one, to bring back an old school character like that. If you read Detective Comics 1000, Sam Bradley makes another appearance in that. And there's a series that we're going to talk about later that I had seen the cover of and knew it was a Darwyn Cooke book, but didn't know anything about what was inside of it. And it's now like top of my list to check out after this. And it's a book called Solo. That is so that's a Sam Bradley-led Detective Comics series. Literally,
I didn't know anything about Solo until I started looking into it today.
Right.
And I was looking up Solo. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that went to like #1 in my Amazon wish list thing. That's what I'm going to be checking out after this for sure. So this Catwoman series was 2001, right? The next big project for Cooke would be 2004's DC The New Frontier. If you haven't read The New Frontier, pause this podcast right now, go to whatever closest bookstore there is to you, buy it, read it, and come back, because it's life-changing to me.
Well, first, lift some weights, and then go buy it.
True. It's a tome, man. It is a giant book for sure, which makes it all the more impressive that this one guy he wrote and drew that massive book. So it is Darwyn Cooke's essence, just his blood and soul poured into one single book. It was a 6-issue miniseries, which was intended to bridge the gap between the Golden Age and Silver Age characters, but it looked at the characters as if, what would it be like if they were operating in the times when they were first published? So the story really takes place in the 50s, but your Batmans and Supermans have been on the scene for a good 10 years or something. They're pretty established. Meanwhile, some guy named Hal Jordan is working at Ferris Airfield, and Barry Allen's going to get struck by lightning and doused in chemicals and whatnot. So really, Barry Allen's Flash is what most people use as the line in the sand to mark the beginning of the Silver Age. And that's exactly what the story does, is to show how those characters came about and then use that real world publication history to fold them into a narrative that aligns with that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That totally tracks with the way the book is paced. The way the book is put together, it's genius through and through. Right.
And there are so many deep cuts in that book. Dinosaur Island, for one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That's an old concept as well that, again...
That's what it opens with.
Yes. I love that. And, spoiler alert here if you haven't read it. The first panel on the first page is Dinosaur Island. And I've seen an interview with Cooke before where he said that, he thought it was very clever to, in the first image, show you who the actual villain of the book is. Because Dinosaur Island, or the Center, is kind of what it's calling itself, because it's sentient, apparently. It ends up being the, global threat that causes a Justice League to form. And another reason I really like this story is because... And this is actually true. It's the only Justice League origin story that I can think of that doesn't include a extraterrestrial threat. That isn't aliens coming down, or Starro or something,
or the
like
White
that.
Martians, or anything like that.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's a homegrown threat to the world that's going to take all of these heroes, and including these two very important heroes that are just coming to the scene, being the Flash and Green Lantern. Another one of my favorite things about New Frontier is Darwyn Cooke's portrayal of Wonder Woman.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
I was just talking about that
it's so good.
Earlier today. It is, the way they portray her is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She is not the... the history of Wonder Woman is long and complicated and wonderful, and it's not something to get into on this episode right now.
Right.
But suffice to say that she has never been the shrinking violet or any kind of damsel in distress.
Right.
the argument obviously could be made against that with her power, her weakness being anytime she's bound, she loses her powers. But we're not even going to get into the subtext of that,
kind of
because that was a point.
You know anything about?
But her response to the Korean War.
Yes.
At the very beginning of the book.
Yes.
When she discusses with Superman. Again, a spoiler alert here, so fast forward if you've already had the
Right.
But
right. You should have paused us and gone out and bought it. And
right. Yeah,
it's
their fault now. Right. It's their fault. When Superman is discussing how she released prisoners of not even prisoners of war, just prisoners of soldiers. These women in cages.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes, these women prisoners.
And allowed them, probably, I want to guess, encouraged them to take retribution on the people who were...
She takes the guns and she puts them in the middle of the camp, and then she puts the soldiers in the cages that the women were in, right?
Right.
And then she lets the women out, and she's basically like, whatever happens after this is not on me, and you probably fucking deserve it anyways.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put put my neck out here. Wonder Woman was right.
Well, yeah. Boy, so bold of you, Nat.
I know, right? Hot take.
Right. I know that she allowed more than likely murdering rapists
to get killed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
That's fine. And the way that she talks about it with Superman, about how she won't kowtow to American exceptionalism or American imperialism or anything like that over the course of the book, not just that one scene, but it is stunning. It is
and she's not beholden to the American government in the same way that, say, Superman would be. I also love that, how large Wonder Woman is, and that she is taller than Superman in those scenes. And
why didn't you notice that?
Yeah, that's Superman is looking up at Wonder Woman, and that's exactly how it should be. I've heard, the podcast. It used to be called Fat Man on Batman. It's now called Fat Man Beyond. It's Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin, and I've heard Mark Bernardin say, "My penis should be afraid of Wonder Woman," and my penis is very much afraid of that version of Wonder Woman. It's way too much woman for me. I can safely say that. Another thing that is one of my favorite aspects about New Frontier, and this is going to get super super geeky, but I love the 3 panel per page format of it. In the same way that Watchmen perfected the 9 panel grid. Which then Tom King would go on.
I was about to say we were just talking about Tom King.
Right, but Tom King would make a career out of copying Watchmen. But the 3 panel grid works really, really well in Darwyn's New Frontier, and you don't notice it at first, and you don't realize that you're becoming used to it. So then, when it gets broken up, when one panel that would be on the bottom gets turned into 3 smaller panels, your eyes immediately notice it's like in a movie when the edits start happening faster, right? This is action is happening.
Right.
And there's a gorgeous scene too where it's Hal Jordan in the Korean War, and the war has just been declared over, but I guess the fighter pilot that he's against doesn't know that. So he gets shot down, he crashes, and he has this conflict in a ditch with a Korean soldier, and he doesn't know how to tell him that the war is over because he doesn't speak his language, and it's either kill or be killed in that moment. And you see the struggle over the gun, and eventually Hal kind of gets it positioned in front of the guy, and then the next page is just bam, and it's all red, and it's the bam automatopoeia right there, and it's so simple, but it's just so effective. Another great aspect of The New Frontier is, I think this is my favorite portrayal of Martian Manhunter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. It's sort of that dry panel to panel joke that you'll find in some of the most thought out art when he's watching television.
Yes.
And they don't mention exactly what he's changing into, but he changes form every time the program changes on the television.
It's Groucho Marx, and then Bugs Bunny, and then
eventually the TV detective.
Right. Yes. which I wonder what the name of his partner is in here, if that's actually Sam Bradley.
I think at one point it is.
Mm-hmm.
When they're in the car about to go take out the cult.
Right, in the church.
The scene after that, then yeah.
Yeah.
I think
where
that actually
you're,
both times, yeah.
I love that scene of Batman, too, like fighting all these monks.
Yeah. And Bradley's commentary on the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, that goes back to a very early That's the first Batman villain, is the monk. But Batman has some, like, cold lines in this book.
Penny book of matches.
That's the best one. That's the best one, where he realizes that this detective that Martian Manhunter is pretending to be is not an actual detective, and he's just kind of like, I don't know what you are or where you came from, but I sunk like a fortune into figuring out how to stop the one in Metropolis, and with you, all I need is a penny for a book of matches. Like, that's just oof.
You know what brutal. I should have done before coming onto the podcast was, he mentioned a specific number for the sliver of kryptonite. He said $70,000. I wish I had done the inflation math to figure out how much that sliver of kryptonite would be today. For real. And I'm sure Batman continuously keeps that in his belt, even though he would lie about it. I like the sly nod to it at the very beginning when Iris West is writing her. It's right after the Dinosaur Island introduction, and they've got the newspaper clipping of Iris West's article. If you read that and you look at the quote-unquote photographs along the spread, it mentions that authorities are still looking into the chemical compound that the Bat-Man used to detain the alien in, I guess, I forget where they were fighting, DC, or no, I think it was actually in Metropolis.
Nice. Good pull. This is like, it's almost,
there's so much to savor.
It's almost like the Pulp Fiction of comic books, in that, like, every time I watch Pulp Fiction, I usually notice something that I didn't notice before, or make some kind of connection before. You can read this 1,000 times and come away with different aspects and different scenes.
It's like watching Arrested Development with the subtitles on. It's like a whole different show.
I've never heard that before. That's good.
Oh, it's so...
I also really dig how, again, Cooke was using the transition from the Golden Age into the Silver Age as a way to, like, frame how these characters would progress in, and then put that in an actual narrative context, right? So in the beginning, you have Batman in his Golden Age outfit. It's very dark and grim, really long ears. He's got the dope purple gloves, and then just the simple bat on the uniform. And when he goes to try to save that child that was kidnapped by the cult with the monks, and the first time you see Batman in the book, the child is just as, or maybe more, afraid of Batman as he is of, like, the monks with knives that were there to sacrifice him. Cooke uses that as the reason for Batman getting a Robin. Later in the book, you see Superman comes to the Batcave, and he's talking with Bruce about it, and that's the first time that he sees Robin there. And he goes, like, a sidekick's a new look for you. And Batman's like, yes, I thought maybe, like, I shouldn't be, like, I intend to scare criminals, not children, I think is the line. And that totally fits to me with who Bruce Wayne is as a person, and, like, what he's trying to accomplish as Batman. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great to see that not only does it take, I suppose, the form of an early look at comic books as a medium, but an early look at comic book characters as people.
Yes. Yeah, very true. Very true.
I think one of the I know that it's not the easiest detail to miss, and it's not a huge triumph of Cooke's to include it, but one of the ones that I really, really appreciate is the black S shield on Superman. I mean, obviously, that's how it would have been in that era. But at the same time,
Max Fleischer.
Exactly. But he didn't have to. He didn't have to go that hard for us, but he did.
Oh, yeah. Knocks it out of the park. I also love his inclusion of the losers and his version of the Suicide Squad in this. This book makes me so disappointed in that version of the losers that was a movie that they made. Have you ever seen that? That's based on this same like comic, but like it just seems that you couldn't even really relate them. Because again, Cook was a kid in the mid to late 60s. So a lot of comics that he was reading would have been like G.I. Joe type stuff. Like your
Sergeant Rock.
Totally. And Sergeant Rock's a big character in this book. Along with stuff like Dinosaur Island. It's just like this like wacky Silver Age
Challengers
wackadoo.
of the Unknown.
Yeah.
I have always wanted Challengers of the Unknown to be better than it is.
Yeah, that's
I hate
true.
to say that because I have yet to read a really good Challengers of the Unknown story.
Yeah.
Not one that I didn't like, don't get me wrong, but just one that has been just world-shaking. Because I want that. And I haven't gotten it yet. It's like if the Fantastic Four didn't get goofy superpowers. Don't get me wrong. I love the Fantastic Four.
Right.
But like they were going to be the Challengers of the Unknown.
Yeah, that's fair. Have you seen Teen Titans Go to the Movies?
No, I haven't.
They're in that.
No way.
The Challenge of the Unknown are in that movie. And like they even acknowledge, they're like, but we're such an obscure reference. How is anyone going to know who we are? And yeah, they get stuck in like the Phantom Zone or something like that too. That movie's actually surprisingly good.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I watched it by myself and then watched it with my 8-year-old, not the other way around.
Of course.
Yeah, once for me to just be like, oh, I get that reference and I get that one too, and like not have to like explain it to someone as well.
All y'all fools. All y'all fools don't get this.
Dude, and not to get sidetracked here, you've seen Endgame by this point, right?
No, I haven't.
What?
I know. I was hoping you wouldn't bring it up. No, it's okay. It's all right. The thing is, it goes back. Well, no, it's not even the same thing as what we were talking about with Game of Thrones. With Endgame and with the Marvel movies, I really enjoy most of them for the most part. But at the same time, I read the comics on a weekly basis, and so whatever happens in this offshoot of a universe, I'll get to it. Right. I care. I promise, but I'll get to it.
On your own time. True.
Yeah, exactly.
This isn't too big of a spoiler then. There's a point in the movie where Captain America has to get a briefcase from these people that were in S.H.I.E.L.D., but we of course know because of Winter Soldier are actually Hydra agents, right? And it's framing like it's going to be that elevator fight. Right, like yes, which put the Russo brothers on the map. It looks like that's exactly what it's going to be, and you're like, they're not. In your head, you're like, are they going to try to like one up that elevator fight? But no, they totally go around it because Cap walks into the elevator, he grabs the briefcase from the guy and whispers into his ear, "Hail Hydra." Which, if you know anything about that controversy, yes, exactly. Yep, so, like in the theater, I was like, "Oh, that's for me." Like, I get that, and I laughed really loud at that part of the movie, and no one in my showing at least got that part.
Right.
But anywho's, so the Flash plays a very important part in New Frontier as well. He basically ends up kind of saving the day at the end, right? With being able to run around Dinosaur Island because you believe that Superman is dead by this point. Lois Lane, there's a really dramatic scene of her doing the news broadcast about the death of Superman. But then, so it's the Atom, right, that has that like shrinking ray, but he hasn't perfected it, and everything he tries to shrink becomes unstable. And they're like, well, that's kind of like exactly the point. Like, we want it to blow up. So they use the Flash to run around using that shrinking beam, and yeah, it does just that. Let's see, any more to say about? I love too the scene where Aquaman shows up at the end with Superman, and he's like, "This one won't stop muttering about someone named Lois."
It's gorgeous.
It's great.
Stuff. There was something that I like that I've been thinking about recently because I was telling my dad about it. I was in Sherman Oaks at Earth 2, and they have a copy.
That's a great name for a comic book store.
Oh, yeah, it's great. It's Mark Waid's comic book store.
What? I didn't know that.
He just goes there all the time.
Oh, okay.
That's like, I think he lives really close to it. I got a signed, like, full run of oh my god, I can't believe I'm blanking again. The one that he did with Alex Ross. Oh my god. Mark Waid.
Kingdom Come.
Thank you. Oh my
You're
god.
welcome.
Yeah, so I got a signed copy for $20.
What?
Because he goes there all the time and just signs any copy that he finds.
That's ridiculous.
Right. So, like, I was there just a week ago.
Hey, next time you're there, if you see something like that, I will Venmo you $20 in a heartbeat. Just saying.
Well, what about $2,500? Because I saw the Flash of Two Worlds there.
Right. I'm not.
Right.
I'm not that liquid right now.
Yeah, right.
To quote Peter Parker. Right?
Yeah, right.
Right. I'm not very liquid now.
Actually, it's
well,
funny,
not $2,500 liquid at least.
No, geez. But that's one of the things. That's what got me thinking about this and about the Flash, and I think it pertains very specifically, or not specifically, but particularly to New Frontier. Is that the Flash of Two Worlds is a nod to the fact that the Flash is the Carmine Infantino's Flash is on the cusp of the Silver Age, but because they tried to woo other fans, like previous fans with the Jay Garrick Flash, and they put the two in the same. They basically combined the two universes and made mention to the two universes, Earth 1 and Earth 2. That is actually the very first time, and the reason we have the multiverse theory in fiction.
Really?
Not just comics.
In fiction. That is massive.
All because Carmine Infantino was like, that helmet looks stupid. Let's give him a thing.
And, it's just... it seems like the more and more we learn about just how the universe works as well, that an actual multiverse theory is not that, like, out of the realm of possibility.
No, it's not far-fetched.
Right, which is bizarre in itself to even say, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's above my pay grade, let me tell you.
For sure. All I know is I'm sure we are living in the dark timeline. Yeah. Damn it, Barry. Going back in time. Do you want Trump as president? Because that's how you get Trump as president.
You should have left the suit empty, Barry.
And before, I do want to read the JFK quote here at the end to kind of cap our discussion on New Frontier. But before we get that, have you ever read it is at the very end of the book. It's an animated special, and it is Rip Hunter, and he's like time traveling around, and he's talking to the reader, right? And he's being like, because the New Frontier exists outside of continuity. It's its own thing. It's basically its own Elseworld story. If you want to, slap a '90s logo on it, yeah, you nailed it. So Rip Hunter is talking about, like, they asked me to explain to y'all just which world this takes place in, continuity-wise. It's mid-century America, people, a time of unbridled prosperity, Elvis, hula hoops, and raccoon skin hats. It's also the era of McCarthyism, lynchings, and atomic paranoia. And as for which world we're on, hundreds of years ago, they said the world was flat. Today, experts will try and tell you there are 52 worlds.
Nice.
Love that, yeah. Mm-hmm. The truth is there are infinite worlds out there, and every year dozens more spring to life. The scientific term to use to describe this state is fictional. Excuse me for a sec. Yeah, then he shoots something off in the distance. But I just love that, and I will use that to some people when, like, people get really caught up on continuity and, like,
right.
How does this, especially in DC, since we do have the multiverse to specifically assign it to, and Grant Morrison has gone as far as to, like, map out most of the worlds in the new 52. Yeah. Did you read the Multiverse or Multiversity by Grant Morrison?
No, I didn't read Multiversity. The most recent of any of those things I just read would be 52.
Okay, yeah, it's really good. Multiversity is, but in it there is, in one of the issues there is literally a map where it's like, okay, Earth 0, Earth 1, Earth 2, and this is how they're different.
Right.
Now he does leave himself some wiggle room by not labeling every Earth. He'll be like Earths 36 to 42 unknown, and then like he'll keep going to some other ones. But yeah, I just love that Rip Hunter is like, here we like to call this scientific term is called fictional.
It's beautiful.
But at the very end of the book is really poignant. And Cooke uses JFK's New Frontier speech to frame the Silver Age as kind of this like optimistic version of the future. So the very last page of the actual comic is straight out of JFK's speech, and it says, "That's the question of the new frontier. That's the choice our nation must make between the public interest and private comfort, between national greatness and national decline, between the fresh air of progress and the stale, dank atmosphere of normalcy, between determined dedication and creeping mediocrity. All mankind waits upon a decision. A whole world looks to see what we do. We cannot fail their trust. We cannot fail to try." Let's see. Cooke describes this as the first time the promise of modern America was ever properly articulated. And like that quote about JFK in general to me can explain why he was elected and like why our country still like looks to this man that had like a 2-year presidency, essentially, like a really short amount of time. But yeah, JFK has had this massive influence on American politics in general. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, man, that got me a little misty-eyed just even reading that. Like, it's just, it's so good.
I tell you what got me a little misty-eyed is one more thing that I feel I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up would be the Steel storyline.
Yes.
John, I guess Wilson in this
right. Or he's like Hooded Justice, right? Isn't that the... Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, we know who he is.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they're separate characters, I think.
Are they? I thought that he was... I thought John Henry Irons, like...
Is that the name of the character in...
No, it was John Wilson in this one, but I guess I just didn't know that was a different character.
Right,
because he, forged himself a couple of metal things and a hammer and then beat the shit out of KKK members, which, regardless of the character, is admirable, to say the least.
Well, it's like Nazis. He's like, you're never going to go wrong with putting Nazis as a villain, you know?
Yeah. See a Nazi, punch a Nazi.
Let's see. Yeah, Hooded Justice was in Watchmen? Interesting. Okay.
Because I thought Watchmen itself was supposed to be, name brand Marvel or DC characters, and then they were told by the editorial board no because they didn't want the question to die.
Yes, it was going to be Charlton Comics characters, which DC had just acquired at that time. But there's a difference in putting a new character like Night Owl in a situation where he has erectile dysfunction, and then putting Blue Beetle in that same situation.
So is that supposed to be Hooded Justice in New Frontier, or is that supposed to be?
It may just be a coincidence that it's that it's the same name, because I'm not finding an actual name for that Hooded Justice that appears in Watchmen. But regardless, yes, his storyline is there's so many tangent storylines that are going on, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I watched the New Frontier movie before I actually read the book.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I put off reading the book for a very long time because I really, really enjoy that movie. Like,
it's great.
It's
so
great. Yeah. And Darwyn Cooke worked intimately with that project when it was even happening.
His art style lends itself so well to animation.
I mean, that's basically where he came from, before getting fully accepted into comics. But he did something like 10% of the actual artwork that's in the movie too, like physically himself.
That's amazing. That's unbelievable. That's so much art.
Yes. so I kind of felt like I'd already gotten the gist of it, which is why I delayed actually reading it. And then finally, like I just found one that was like a good price or something, and I got it. And if you are in that same boat thinking, well, I've seen the movie, like, it's probably going to be the same stuff in the book. It is mostly the same stuff in the book, and then 1,000 times more. Like, you don't get the loser's storyline, you don't get the suicide storyline, and like those are some of my favorite parts of the book. That aren't going to make it in the movie. And actually, I found in researching this too that the movie almost cut out the Wonder Woman and Lois Lane storylines as well to make room for everything else. Right.
That's one of the reasons I described Darwyn Cooke as a crusader.
Yes.
Is that it was his influence alone that saved those storylines from being cut.
Absolutely. Like you said, if you don't include those, then we're just talking about white guys in the 50s. If that hasn't been covered enough.
Yeah, right.
So a little more on the visual style of the book, and you could say this for Cooke's artwork as a whole, was inspired by 1950s advertising for one thing, along with works of a Jack Kirby, and then Alex Toth, which was a Hanna-Barbera animator. So again, I'm sure,
you brought up Johnny Quest earlier.
100%, and we're also covering Johnny Quest in our sister show, Classic Cartoon Rewind, right now. And that is in Darwyn Cooke's DNA for sure, and it comes across in practically every panel. Okay, so after post New Frontier Darwyn Cooke, right? It was a massive success. He could basically do anything he wanted to do at this point. And what's the series that he follows up New Frontier with is the solo series that we were just talking about with Sam Bradley. So I guess he kind of felt like, he has this pull that he may not get again. I'm going to take this extremely obscure character and we're going to do a whole series on just that guy. And it is an interesting concept to think about this pulp fiction detective, how the lens in which that character would view the DC world as a whole. Because this is something I try to relate to my 8-year-old all the time. Like, he's really big into Pokemon right now. And he's like, wouldn't that be cool if those like actually existed? And I'm like, no, that would be fucking terrifying.
Yeah, no. We'd have something to say about that.
Right. And like, it's the same thing that like, we usually see Gotham through Batman's prism, right? And like through his frame of reference, Gotham's like really not that bad. If you're a regular person, Gotham is a horrifying, hellish place to be. And a series that really captures that is Gotham Central, which kind of just follows your regular beat cops on the GCPD. And there's a scene where they think they're breaking into it's like a drug dealer's house or something that they think they're going into. And there's Mr. Freeze behind the door. So like they know they're immediately in the wrong place and they're out of their element, Donnie. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So just reeling it back in here. So that was his 2004 series, I guess, once he had that just kind of pull within DC as itself. Later in 2006, Cooke would pair with Jeff Loeb to make the Batman Spirit crossover, which is actually really good. And Cooke would go on to do a solo Spirit run that kind of tried to bring the Spirit into a more modern context, which I have to say I'm not like huge on. I think that character works best in the 30s and 40s in the same way that you can't really take the Shadow or the Phantom out of that time period and still make it feel like as good as it was, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that I would love to see the Shadow in a different time period, but it would have to be a radical transformation of the character. Same with the Phantom. I've actually been a huge fan of both of those characters, so it's really cool to mention those. Yeah. I agree. That's right. All I have to say. You're absolutely right.
Right. Again, as much as I would love to see that as well, I just think they fit those time periods the best. And anytime you try it, like there was that Sci-Fi Channel movie they did of the Phantom that like brought him into a current time.
Yeah, with the weird new costume.
I was literally just about to say, besides the costume being atrocious, like just god awful, makes anything on the CW Flaro universe look amazing.
Right.
Besides that, putting him in a modern context is kind of weird, but you would think that with a character like the Phantom, it should work, right? Because it's this legacy character that gets passed down from father to son. So, like, yeah, eventually there would be a Phantom in modern time. There's got to be a right way to do it. No one's done it yet. So, listener out there, if that's your bag, go for it.
The only way that you could do it would be to update it. I think more instead of focusing on what the character does to achieve their goals, you'd have to, because I think those are timeless, of course.
Sure.
Generally speaking, you'd have to focus more on the issues that the character fights. And with characters that are particularly dated, like those characters, you would have to be very, very precise in how you update them. For instance, the Shadow being, just another wealthy playboy, Lamont Cranston or Kent Allard, however, whichever one you
goes to the Orient, learns how to do what they do better than them.
The Orient that everyone loves to have their, home nation called.
This is a dark origin story.
Yeah, right. Oh, I thank God this white man went over there and learned how to do it better than all the people who've been doing it for thousands of years.
And brought it back to the West. And
thank God he was a drunk first and then went over there and then
totally
learned how to be exceptional at everything.
Right. Yeah, that's Kent Allard or Lamont Cranston, whatever you want to, whichever name you want to go with.
Right. And although I don't know if Kent Allard ever actually had the shadow powers. Anyway, I digress.
Okay.
But you'd have to update that origin story, and then you have to update what they stand for. They'd have to stand for something very positive and very modern. To use a modern lingo, they'd have to be woke AF.
Okay, I got it. And just a quick pitch. The modern Phantom would be a girl. And you make it to where, like, the last one never had a son. He only had a daughter. And so it's kind of like that would fly in today.
She'd kick ass.
Exactly. That would sell too, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, they probably have my money anyways because, like, I love both those characters. So, like, whatever you put out, like, I'm probably gonna buy it. Like, I think it's
or Rocketeer. I mean,
Rocketeer. Yes. Rocketeer is excellent. And they did there was a Rocketeer Spirit crossover a few years back called Pulp Friction. That's actually pretty good. Yeah.
Great.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah, and Garth Ennis's run on The Shadow is really, really good.
I read it. I really, really enjoyed it.
That's my favorite, where you don't really know, like, is there even really a Lamont Cranston, or is The Shadow this, like, cosmic force that, like, picks a body to, like, inhabit for a while, like the Phoenix Force or something like that, and then moves on. To me, that is how you make that character interesting, rather than it just being a wealthy man about town playboy who puts a bandana around the bottom of his nose and wears a slouch hat.
Yeah, no one will recognize me now. No. But I thought the movie did a good job of that too, with showing, like, a physical, like, his face actually changes. The Alec Baldwin movie, he goes from being Alec Baldwin to he has this kind of, like, nose prosthetic or something going on. Anyways, it was effective. I love that movie.
Me too. I
love The Rocketeer. I think The Rocketeer is actually the best of all three of those movies, Phantom, Shadow, Rocketeer. I think the only reason that it didn't do well is that it was victim of the other two fell victim to as well. They didn't have a real audience baked into it. The people who grew up with those
are dead. Yeah,
and the kids who they were aimed at never heard of these characters.
True. Because of the comics.
You and me, but, like, come on.
Well, if you're a kid and you're reading the funnies, which I think every kid has done at some point, the Phantom is always in those, and to this day is still printed in the funnies section. I've been making this argument for a while that I think the Rocketeer is directly responsible for the MCU, in that is Disney's first, like, dipping a toe in the kind of superhero waters. And if you look at the model of that movie, the rest of the MCU the movies, especially the origin story ones, really follow that same kind of like optimistic vibe, and just like it's fun and it's colorful, and there are these outlandish villains, and it's great. Also, little teaser, The Shadow is going to be the first movie we're going to cover on Was It Really That Bad, which is a new segment we're doing where we're going to examine critically panned comic book movies. So now we might have to get you in to guest on that, man, if you're a big fan of that movie like I am.
Yeah,
I think it's very...
right. As a colorblind person myself, let me tell you.
Oh, my goodness.
Got some good thoughts on that one.
Awesome. Okay, so yes, onward with Darwyn Cooke. So, we said in the intro to this episode that one of the first things Cooke did as a kid was to trace over Will Eisner's work. So now he's getting to work on The Spirit. And he said, quote, that his work on The Spirit was the most exciting and horrifying offer that he'd been made in his entire career. Well, I mean, I can't even think of a comparison of it, like in that, you're working on what the guy who the main comic awards are named after, his most recognized work, besides maybe A Contract with God.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Besides
sort of
that. Yeah. Have you ever tried to read A Contract with God, by the way?
No, I have not.
So it's lauded as the first graphic novel, and it's Will Eisner, and it is really good.
I know about it, yeah.
Right. Actually, it's super depressing. It's I couldn't get right. I couldn't get through it. It's a lot of like Jewish slums, and like it's really depressing. It's great, and the artwork in it is Will Eisner's usual phenomenal self. But to me, you can get those in The Spirit as well, and it's much more fun. So that's just funny that Cooke's career had changed so much in like 7 years, right? We're in 2006, and he's working on his hero's main character when, 7 years ago, he was a storyboard artist that he got that job by replying to an ad in a fucking newspaper.
Right.
Chalk that away as things that will never happen again.
Yeah.
Like DC doesn't put out stuff like that anymore. No,
DC doesn't tell people what headquarters is.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's Area 52.
Yeah. It's actually, I believe, under Lionsgate. It's in the same building as Lionsgate on Hollywood Way.
Goodness gracious. But yeah, that's such a antiquated notion of responding to an ad in the paper and then getting on board with a massive company like that. I'm envious of people that were able to. To me, it's much harder to get noticed nowadays than it would be at that point. Not to say that their hard work and everything wouldn't go forward, but there's just so much content out there right now, because it's easy to put your content out there with Kickstarter, and there's this thing called the internet that's really helpful with that too.
Yeah, I've heard that's pretty cool. I've also heard it's a mistake.
True.
Time will tell.
Time is told. Yeah. So then onward into Cooke's career. In 2009, he put out one of my favorites of his, and that is and this isn't even with DC, it's with IDW. He kind of did an adaptation of Richard Stark's The Parker series. And the first one is called The Hunter. And there have been, a bunch of different movies and stuff. They're based off this character. And it's a, hard-boiled detective, just a mean son of a bitch that can take a punch and, give it back kind of character. If you haven't read the Parker novels, they're excellent. And Cooke does such a good job of visually telling the story that I want to say for the first, maybe 10 pages or something of the first Hunter book, there's not any bubbles, there's not any captions. You just see Parker walking home across this bridge and through the streets, and you can tell he's had a rough night, and they're excellent. Have you ever had a chance to read any of those?
No, I haven't, but I'm enthralled.
They're really good. I was lucky enough to discover them at the Hoover Library a few years back, and I just destroyed them. And I ended up, a buddy of mine is really into the Bond books. And the second one opens up in a hotel in 1964 Miami. And it's just like, it's basically the beginning of Goldfinger. And as soon as I read that, like it was that guy's birthday came up, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy in this book because I know he's just going to like fucking love it. It's like if Dirty Harry crossed with James Bond and was set in like swanky 1960s stuff. It's really good.
Right on.
Yeah. And of course, Darwyn Cooke's artwork just perfectly pairs with that time period.
See it now.
Which I kind of want to touch a little bit on this. That I think, and I have seen. Do you know the artist Doc Shaner? Does that ring a bell at all to you? He drew Future Quest. If you.
We read, we talked about that one a while ago. Yeah, I read the first like 3 issues of that, and I really liked it.
Super good.
Budgetary reasons.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. But it again has this kind of like retro vibe. And
sure.
I follow Doc Shaner on Twitter. He's one of my favorite like Twitter personalities to interact with. And I saw him talking recently about like it's almost like being typecast as an artist, like that you feel like you can do more than these retro cover stuff, you know. When DC wants to do a Batman omnibus from the 70s, you know, they're going to call Doc Shaner or Michael Cho. Mm-hmm. Either one of those guys are the guys that are kind of carrying the ones that are most directly carrying Darwyn Cooke's legacy going forward. The same in a kind of tangentially way, Mitch Gerads. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name.
I have no idea how you say that, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yes, he did Doom Patrol for a while.
Yeah, he did Mr. Miracle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, that series.
Right.
But
yes.
Let's not even get me started on that one.
No, yeah, and Nick Darrington would be in that same category too. That these were guys that are around our age, like they're either in their 30s or, you know, staring down the barrel of 30 like I am.
Same.
Right, yeah, this July for me.
By what?
11th?
12th.
Oh, man. One day, damn it. I'll let you know how it feels.
Cool.
On the 11th, just to give you a spoiler for the next day, you know. I forgot where I was going with that, but
oh, you know, you were talking about how they were artists on the cusp of their
right, that they grew up on Bruce Timm's Batman, right? So like, which as we now know had a good bit of Darwyn Cooke mixed into it eventually at the end, especially when it came to Batman Beyond. To come all the way full circle, Doc Shaner has been on the Batman Beyond book in some recent issues this past month. So like that's just kind of like a perfect, you needed to be here, this is exactly for you kind of moment. So now, you know, unfortunately, 4 years ago in 2014, right? 2014? 5 years ago. Cooke did pass away from an aggressive form of cancer. And like I can actually remember where I was when I heard that Darwyn Cooke passed. I was living in New Orleans at the time, and I had listened to like a very new Fat Man on Batman. I want to say it was some podcast, and they were talking about it, and like it just really hit me hard as far as a celebrity death. That when you really love someone's work that to mainstream is maybe not that well known, it can almost feel like this belongs to me, right? Like it's a very like personal part of you. Like when Mark Hamill or something passes away, like everyone is going to grieve that, right? Because it's fucking Luke Skywalker, and he was there for, he might as well be Mickey Mouse in a lot of people's childhood. But something more on the smaller level that's more personal as that just kind of like, it just hits you more on the gut level to me.
I think you and I actually talked about it within the week.
Right.
And I think one of us messaged the other.
Yeah, we've been, it's funny enough, like we hung out a good bit in high school and stuff, I would say, but more like tangentially, you know?
Sure.
We've kind of like more directly communicated after high school, which I think is not really the way that like usually works.
Well, I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that a lot of the stuff that we're interested in is stuff that you obviously not necessarily should have to hide in high school.
Oh, no, totally.
You don't necessarily want people you're not going to whip out a comic book like a Action Comics number 9 whatever.
Hit the nail on the
biology.
head there. Right. Especially at that time, this is pre-MCU. Comics weren't really cool like they are now. So yeah, finding someone else like, oh, they're like me. Like they have these, boxes and stuff full of these disposable media at their house that they take really
boxes,
seriously.
If you will.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Same with Mike Thomas, our other co-host. Me and him were in the band together.
I had no idea.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, he hid that well then. Yeah. No, I can't remember when I think it was Final Crisis that was coming out when it was either Infinite Crisis or Final Crisis. I get one of those confused. It was the Grant Morrison one. There we go. Yeah, it was coming out at the end of our high school career, and I remember like being on the bus going to different like band events and like going over that with Mike Thomas and talking about Superboy fucking punching the walls of reality and stuff.
Yeah, right. Punch reality in the face until it, like,
until you break the multiverse. Wonderful. So once Cooke did pass away, and he really wasn't that old. I think he was only like in his 50s, I want to say. But again, you can kind of look at him and see that he led like a little bit of a hard life. And, I've seen a lot of pictures of him with, maybe a little glassy eyed and his arm around, somebody else massive in comics. And they've got, some drinks in their hand, like a cigarette hanging out of their mouth and stuff. Classic cool is how I would really describe Darwyn Cooke as a person and his artwork as well. They're mirror images.
You're right, though. You absolutely can see the age lines on his face.
Right.
Unlike Grant Morrison, whom I'm convinced is immortal.
Well, I'm sure he just made a sigil and keeps writing his youth into his books. And if he keeps drawing himself the same way that he wants to perceive himself, then he'll stay that way, right?
I just imagine him sketching himself in the back of his Uber and getting younger. And like the Uber driver is watching this happen in the rearview mirror, and like that poor dude.
He's like Dorian Gray or something. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Like he gets a 5-star review from Grant Morrison. It's like I don't care.
Right. That's great. That's hilarious. No, I've actually heard Grant Morrison talk about that like when he was writing The Invisibles.
You understand him?
I've listened to a lot of Grant Morrison interviews because he's just so fucking entertaining. Like that man is just he's awesome. He's my all-time favorite comic writer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But he, at the time of him writing The Invisibles, he still had hair and he wasn't like as kind of like punk rocky as he eventually came to be. And so he started writing this character in The Invisibles. It was based off him, King Mob.
King Mob, yeah.
Right. That is, this shaved head guy that's like super punk rock, and he's dating this like really hot redhead. What happened like 6 months later in Grant Morrison's life? He's a shaved head punk rock kind of guy that's dating this super hot redhead. So you could look at his life and make an argument for whatever you put out into the universe. You can kind of speak into existence, and that's actually something I've been trying to have my kid understand a little bit too, is the power of positive thought, right?
Yeah.
But when Cooke did pass, a bunch of huge people in comics came out, and he was compared as like a direct style with Joe Kubert or Alex Toth again, which was that Hanna-Barbera artist, or the great Jack Kirby, and that's not something I would have immediately put together, was Kirby and Cooke. But if you, especially in my head, I'm picturing Orion and some like New Gods artwork from Jack Kirby. And that fits perfectly into that scene in New Frontier when Hal Jordan and his flying buddy have flown into the eye of Dinosaur Island, and it's all like psychedelic and messing with their mind and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. That's straight Kirbyism. So Cook was also aware that he was maybe a little difficult to work with sometimes. It was a trait that was ultimately recognized as beneficial by his comic peers. Artist Cliff Shang noted that Cook's uncompromising nature, quote, opened doors for lots of us. And I think that's really the main kind of like takeaway legacy here for Darwyn Cooke is trailblazer, like you were saying, that he had a difficult road, but through his difficult road, he was almost a martyr for all these people to come after him, that we just mentioned, your Michael Cho's, your Doc Shaners, your Nick Darringtons. If you like any of those guys, go and examine the grandfather of their art. Well, let's say maybe just the father of their artwork. Yeah. We can maybe call Jack Kirby the grandfather of their artwork. Sure. But the guy that almost single-handedly carried that torch through the early 2000s and into what we have now. So Cooke he's one of my favorites. I have never heard anyone in the comic book industry they would say maybe that he was abrasive, that, that he, I can easily see him, he looks like a yeller, if that makes sense.
An old yeller.
Right. He looks like he would yell when he would get mad. But then everyone always talks about just like how joyful he was and like how much fun to be around and just like a magnetic personality. And I think with any kind of pictures you see of his personal life, and then the fun that comes out in his art too, you have to see that that's what was inside of Darwyn Cooke.
Yeah, it's those positive things are, I think, ultimately redeeming. Unlike, say, a John Byrne.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair comparison.
I mean, I love John Byrne's work. I love it. I have heard that he was an absolute nightmare to work with, and I've heard no redeeming personal anecdotes of any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I could be wrong. I'd love to hear something that refutes that, but
there it is. Yeah.
But there it is.
So yeah, Darwyn Cooke, love him. Please seek him out. If this podcast is your first mention of hearing who this Darwyn Cooke guy is, first check out New Frontier, because that's just the boiled down essence of his career, really. It's his opus. But branch out to your Parker series, see where it started with your Batman egos. I am going to continue my exploration of Darwyn Cooke with going through that Sam Bradley solo series. Can't wait for that. I love when you think you know everything about a musician or an artist or something that you love, and then you find out that there was something else by them, and you're like, oh great, there's this you're right, there's this other little corner that I can go into and have something new from this person that I cherish. So yeah, do you have anything else to say about the late great Darwyn Cooke? Or
there is just, I think you briefly touched on it just a minute ago, there is just this sense of joy, this sense of hopefulness, and ultimately it's an incredible balance, really, of cynicism and innocence that permeate through his work.
Yes, that's perfect. In that, again, in New Frontier, there's the threat of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. And I think there's even a mention of Superman having to appear in front of the House of Un-American Activities. So yes, there is that cynicism of the era. But if you look at the cover of New Frontier, what sticks out to me, all these characters are smiling. Mm-hmm. They're joyful, and DC usually gets slapped with the dark, edgy, everything's really dour.
Snyderverse.
Yes, and to some extent New 52. But right. But Cooke's artwork is a breath of fresh air that's out of it's almost like a world where Frank Miller didn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Oh man,
right.
That's totally true.
What a world. Right. It's he might be like the anti Frank Miller, and that Frank Miller has all the cynicism without much of the joy that Cooke is able to infuse in his artwork, and it's just it's inherent and it's there on the surface, but it's still like so subtle that you can go back to it and find something new that you never knew was there before, and that might be the mark of great art, like in general.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right, that you can feed.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Like, you're absolutely right about that. He's the anti-Frank Miller. That just got the wheels a turning, if you will, because Frank Miller, I hesitate to, again, stick my neck out so far, but he almost ruined comics. Me at least, because I'm not a fan of the grim, gritty. We have to be hyper realistic. Our heroes have to make sense, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Darwyn Cooke is the ultimate answer to that. He eschews reality without giving any ground to a sort of internal logic. Like, everything still makes sense, even though it's not super hyper realistic.
Right. It doesn't talk down to its audience. It's not like for kids or something like that.
But it very well could be.
No, 100%. I could show the movie New Frontier to my 8-year-old, and I'm sure he would love it. And then he can come back, 15 years later, and once he's learned in school about all just the deep cultural divides of the 50s and 60s that Cooke is touching on in New Frontier, and come away with a whole different appreciation to it. Yeah, it's wonderful, and again, if this is your first if this is the first time Darwyn Cooke has popped up on your radar, I sincerely hope that you go out and discover his work. And if you do, please tweet us at GRC Podcast and let you know what you've thought about it. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up. You have anything else to say about Darwyn there?
No, I think we've covered it very nicely.
Excellent. Okay, well, Nat, again, man, just thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Carter. It's been an honor.
We definitely have to do this again. I don't know if you saw, but I was very excited earlier this week when I figured out how to record and then put that on Skype and then put that into Audacity and edit it and everything. It's literally like a whole new world. So this, it's opening a bunch of different doors where I don't have to physically have maybe Mike and Huey and myself in my house, in my basement studio here.
Living in the future.
I know, right? Crazy. They got to quote Boomhauer, they got some crazy stuff on that internet, man.
Dang old click.
All right. Well, that's been These Guys Have Issues. If you like what you heard here, I hope that you subscribe to us. We're pretty much found wherever quality podcasts are found now. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a ton of other. We're on some that I didn't even know we were on, that I get I'm able to see where all of our listens and stuff come from. And Podcast Addict, I guess we got on that because it maybe links with Google. But yeah, we've got stuff going on from that. So if you want to keep up with everything Grassroots Comics, please like and follow our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Grassroots Comics. You can follow us on Twitter at GRC Podcast, and we're also on Instagram at Grassroots Comics. Until next week, I've been your host, Carter Hutchison.
And I'm the guest, Nat Yonce.
And we'll see you next week, kiddos. Bye.
See ya.
This has been a Grassroots Comics production. Da-da-da! So what's your story?
What are you? Some kind of silly cartoon?
You got a problem with cartoons?